What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Sorcerer Healer. So the Sorcerer Healer is still pretty much right where it has been over the past few patches. It is a healer class that brings a couple of unique things to the table, unique synergy, a unique class buff, but still has the same weaknesses that it has had in the past. Namely, the healing output of a Sorc might be a little bit lower than what you would expect, at least sustained healing output, even though they do have the strongest burst heal in the game through the Twilight Matriarch. And that's just because Sorc healers don't have a source of minor mending or major mending like Templars, Wardens do. So overall, the amount of healing that you're able to do might end up being just a hair lower compared to a Templar or a Warden. In terms of just the amount of DPS you're able to pull, Sorc healers actually are probably going to be one of the better options if you kind of want to fall into this sort of healing slash off DPSing role, mainly because your Twilight Matriarch will do passive damage, and obviously you have things like Lightning Flood or Liquid Lightning, as well as potentially Daedric Tomb, in order to help proc your Minor Prophecy buff. So in terms of kind of DPS output, Sorc healers are probably up there as one of the better kind of healer off DPS roles that you might find in endgame trials groups. So like the rest of our build videos, we will not be going any over gear in this video. So any healer gear that I'm running right now, and other sets that you might want to consider running as a healer, those can be found in a separate video which should be popping up in the upper right hand corner. So if you want to know what gear you should be running on a healer, pause this video, go ahead and check that gear video out, and then come back here for skills, as well as a brief discussion on the philosophy behind healing and how a Sorc healer differentiates itself among the other 5 classes in the game. So let's go ahead and get started here, starting with our front bar, our Restoration Staff bar. So we have Illustrious Healing, Dark Conversion, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more in depth once we go through all the other bars. There's kind of a weird thing with Dark Conversion and its counterpart Dark Deal that I want to mention specifically for healers. Then we have Combat Prayer for the Mind of Berserk buff. Twilight Matriarch, which I mentioned earlier, is actually one of the strongest burst heals, if not the strongest burst heal in the game right now, rivaling that and even surpassing Breath of Life on Templars. Energy Orb, as you can imagine, for the heal, as well as the combustion synergy to return resources back to your allies. And then for our ultimate, I have Absorption Field here because it's actually a very good AoE heal over time ultimate. It can also stun enemies, so it's really great in trash fights where you can stun enemies. But there are a couple of other ultimates that I'll talk about in a few minutes that you could use instead of Absorption Field. And on our back bar, this is the Lightning Staff bar. We have Elemental Drain. You can swap this out because realistically only one Elemental Drain ever needs to be used in a group, so if somebody else is already running it, you might not need to run Elemental Drain. Liquid Lightning, this is for the Conduit synergy. It's a unique synergy, so no other place to get the Conduit synergy, so it helps out your stamina DPS that are running Lakestes to improve Alkosh uptime, or Major Slayer uptime, and yes, it does improve Alkosh uptime as well on tanks, so definitely a skill you should be using as a Sorc healer. Blockade of Storms, this is to proc your enchants, help with off-bounce uptime as well, because you pretty much have to use Blockade if you want to get consistent off-bounce uptime. We have to double bar the Matriarch, as it is a pet, and then we have a flex spot here, which I'm using to run Overflowing Altar, which gives you the minor lifesteal, which is a pretty decent, nice heal over time, as well as a Blood Feast synergy, which is another unique synergy, or not unique synergy, but it's another synergy you can provide for the group for the more Major Slayer uptime, as well as Alkosh uptimes. And obviously your ultimate is going to be Aggressive Warhorn for the Major Force. Now, very quickly, I did say I wanted to talk about Dark Conversion and its counterpart, Dark Deal, because in terms of how healers sort of work, especially Sorc healers, you might want to pick one. You can pick either morph, realistically. So, why is that? Because Dark Deal does return stamina rather than magicka. Martial Knowledge is a set that is becoming more popular among endgame healers. It's considered one of the staple sets for sort of speedruns and score running groups because it provides a unique damage debuff on the enemy. So it basically allows you to deal about 4%, 5% more damage basically damage taken debuff that's applied on the enemy. However, to proc Martial Knowledge, you basically need to keep your stamina below 50%. And so Dark Deal kind of gives you a little bit of leeway when it comes to how low you can let your stamina go. No other healer really has a move that's able to return such a large chunk of stamina at a time. So Dark Deal might be a decent option if you're running Martial Knowledge. It's not really something I would say you should use if you're just starting to learn how to use Martial Knowledge. It's definitely something that requires some fine-tuning. But if you can manage it, Dark Deal is actually not a terrible option here. That being said, I personally would prefer to run Dark Conversion because it returns magicka, and obviously you're using magicka to heal things. It also does have a stamina cost, so you can use this to get your stamina below 50%. And it's a fairly low cost as well, about 2,000 stamina, so it might be easier to maintain Martial Knowledge and your below 50% stamina using Dark Conversion than Dark Deal. But I did want to point that out, that Dark Deal might be a decent option to look into as a Sorcerer Healer. Now in terms of other abilities you might want to run. So the reason why we're running Dark Conversion is not just for the sustain, but because you need to use a Dark Magic ability in order to use the Exploitation passive, which provides Minor Prophecy to you and the group. If you're running all stamina DPS, then obviously you don't need to worry about this at all because they're not going to make use of the additional spell crit. But for mixed groups or magicka heavy groups, then obviously you're going to want to use this passive here. So that's why we're using Dark Conversion. If you don't want to use Dark Conversion, let's say your sustain is perfectly fine, you don't need to run it, then you can go with Daedric Tomb instead. So this will also proc Exploitation, and it also provides some additional damage as well. So kind of fitting into that whole kind of healer as well as providing some DPS role there. The other abilities here, the other active abilities, aren't going to be quite as useful. In Case is more for tanks, for CC stuff, and Rune Prison as well is also more for PvP than it is for PvE. So the other abilities aren't really all that useful on a Sorcerer Healer. In terms of other things, if you just want to get just tons of max magicka, you can use Bound Aegis, which also provides physical and spell resistance through minor resolve, so always nice if you want some more survivability. If you need to run a shield, you can run Empowered Ward or Hardened Ward. As a healer, you should be running Empowered Ward because it provides minor intellect to everybody, which is a very good buff to have on hand, not just for healers, but also tanks and magicka DPS. And then under Storm Calling, if you'd like, you can run Power Surge. Power Surge does provide a heal around you for a 15-meter radius, so it's pretty large, and it also provides major sorcery, so if you don't want to run Spell Power Potions for whatever reason, you can run Power Surge. But the heal itself is not that strong. So you can see here 2652 health every 3 seconds. That works out to be about 900 health or so every second. But it is also contingent on being able to proc a critical heal every 3 seconds. Healers, generally speaking, will run a little bit lower crit chance unless you're running the Thief Mundus, so it might be a little bit difficult to get that on cooldown, but it is one option to run. Power Surge does add a little bit of additional heal over time. You can pretty much use it as you would something like Minor Lifesteal. Under the weapons line, Destruction Staff line, besides Elemental Drain and Elemental Blockade, you might want to run Crushing Shock as well for a ranged interrupt. That's always nice to have on hand. Then under Restoration Staff line, Radiant Regeneration is a pretty good heal over time that you can provide to multiple people. Healing Ward is another burst heal. You usually won't need to run this unless you are not running the Matriarch for whatever reason. You'd be mainly using this in combination with the Blackrose Prison Staff that gives out Major Vitality whenever you use Steadfast Ward. The burst heal itself from Healing Ward is not terrible. So it's not a bad burst heal if you don't need to run the Matriarch for whatever reason, but the Matriarch is going to be better. Having the Matriarch out, not only is it a stronger heal, but it also provides some additional health as well through one of the Daedric summoning passives. You have another shield through Harness Magicka or Dampen Magic, but obviously Empowered Ward is going to be more beneficial because it provides that minor intellect. Let's see, what else? If you are running Zens and you need multiple dots going, Soul Trap is one potential dot you can use to keep track of Zens. Under the Mage's Guild line, Degeneration or Structured Entropy kind of falls into that same line. Again, if you're running Zens, it is an ability you're going to want to have on hand. You can swap this out for a number of abilities on your bars. And then under the Citric Order line, either Morph of Mend Wounds, Symbiosis, and Mend Spirits are situationally useful, mainly because they provide the highest amount of healing done per second. So, might be some instances where you want additional healing done. There is one kind of very niche case scenario where you might want to run this, and that's if you're using Hollowfang's Thirst, just because it can proc off of damage and healing. So there is a chance that you will proc Hollowfang Thirst on the boss, and nobody will be able to get the extra magicka. So if you use this, you basically toggle it, and it turns your light and heavy attacks into only healing abilities. Then you will pretty much always get a Hollowfang proc on the group, but then you would be giving up some DPS to do so. So not really something I'd recommend, but it is a niche use of this ability here. Then all the abilities under the Undaunted line you're going to want to have unlocked: Overflowing Altar for the Lifesteal and Blood Feast synergy, Shadow Soak for the Black Widow synergy. Even though the synergy is not quite as strong as it used to be, it's still pretty strong. Inner Rage, there are some strategies where you will need to taunt things, so you want to make sure to have Inner Rage as a taunt. And then Bone Surge for the Spinal Surge synergy for the Major Vitality, which is situationally useful in certain fights where you have healing debuffs going out, like Cloud Rest and Execute to combat Baneful Mark. And obviously Energy Orb for the healing and the combustion synergy. Finally, under the Alliance War line, Efficient Purge is needed if you're in a fight where you have to purge things. So for example, Halls of Fabrication, the first boss, you're going to want to run Purge. And then you can also run Reviving Barrier as an ultimate instead of Absorption Field. This provides a pretty large shield as well as a heal over time. Slotting Reviving Barrier also gives you some additional magicka regen through the Magicka 8 passive. So if you want some additional sustain, you can slot Reviving Barrier instead of Absorption Field. Slotting Absorption Field will give you better spell damage, so you'll have stronger heals, 2% additional spell damage with Absorption Field. And that pretty much covers it for the skills parts of this video. Now let's go ahead and talk about the philosophy behind healing, what sets Sorc Healer apart. Already mentioned that Sorc Healers don't have a source of minor mending at all. So if you go through all the passives here, none of them will provide minor mending, or major mending for that matter. So because of that, it's going to be, your heals are not going to be quite as strong. So in terms of just raw healing that is, that you dish out, it's not going to be quite as strong because you don't have the minor mending. That being said, you do have Expert Mage, which increases your spell damage for every Sorc ability you have slotted. So at the bare minimum, you should have between 4 and 6%, depending on how many Sorc abilities you have slotted. So for example, on the front bar, we have 3, we get 6% additional spell damage. Spell damage directly influences your healing strength, so even though we aren't getting major or minor mending, we are still kind of making up for that a little bit with the Expert Mage passive. So that's one thing that sets Sorc Healers apart. Don't expect your heals to be as strong as Templars. Of course, Matriarch is a very strong burst heal, but it doesn't scale off of spell damage. So your other heals here aren't going to be quite as strong as Templars or Wardens because of that lack of minor mending. The other thing that sets Sorc Healers apart is the fact that you have a little bit more damage potential. That's mainly because you're using Liquid Lightning, which deals shock damage. You have your energized bonus here. Also ties into Expert Mage, which gives you some additional spell damage. So your spell damage bonus is going to be on the higher side. So this is with 3 magicka regen glyphs. So you can see we have a little bit better spell damage. Not by much, but every little bit counts when you're trying to dish out as much damage as you possibly can. Again, this is with the 3 magicka regen. So if we were to swap these out with like spell damage, we would get a little bit more out of them than compared to like on a Templar or a Warden. And obviously we have one of the strongest burst heals in the game through Twilight Matriarch. One thing that's a little bit tricky with Sorc Healers is your sustain move, which is going to be Dark Conversion, has a cast time associated with it. It's a 1-second cast time. You won't be able to block while using it, so just be mindful of when you decide to use this ability. So you can see here it does take 1 second in order for it to completely work its way out. So that's kind of what separates Sorc Healers apart. They're still very strong. They are going to be desirable in sort of magicka DPS heavy groups in order to help provide minor prophecy. For more stamina heavy groups, Sorc Healers are probably not going to be used very often just because you don't really provide anything that really helps out stamina DPS outside of a unique synergy. But even a unique synergy can be obtained by another healing spec. So for example, Necro Healer or Warden Healer, they also have unique synergies, so it's not like you're going to be losing anything by using a Warden Healer instead of a Sorc Healer if in a stamina heavy group. But for magicka heavy groups, because obviously magicka nightblades and magicka necromancers are pulling higher DPS, magicka necromancers in particular are desired because of their major vulnerability. Sorcerer healers are going to be more common in those magicka heavy groups. So for Cloud Rest, for example, Asylum, and potentially progression groups that might run some mixed magicka stamina setups, Sorcerer healers are going to be better there just because of that minor prophecy bonus. Now, in terms of healing, the philosophy behind healing and things like that. For those guys who are coming from other MMOs, healing in ESO is going to be a little bit different. So while the main job of a healer still remains the same, obviously you need to heal people, keep people alive, your second job is to provide buffs and debuffs to the group in order to maximize your overall DPS. So you fit more into a support role. The line that separates okay healers to good healers and good healers from great healers is really how well you're able to manage buffs and debuffs. The great healers are able to manage very high uptimes on their debuffs, able to provide synergies on cooldown. So things like Minor Berserk from Combat Prayer, Minor Prophecy, as a Sorcerer healer, and any other buffs and debuffs that your sets might provide. Major Courage, the Zens, and Martial Knowledge, unique damage taken debuffs, minor vulnerability. Getting very high uptimes on those, that's what raid leaders are looking for as you get more deeper into the endgame PvE content. So that's really what separates out healers. So obviously you want to make sure to keep people alive. Your first job is to heal. So if people are dying on you, then obviously you're failing as a healer. But once you kind of get a sense of what the fight looks like, what damage output is like, and you kind of learn just how much healing you need to keep everybody up, that's when you want to start shifting your focus not just towards healing, but also managing buffs and debuffs. The good thing is a lot of these skills that provide buffs and debuffs do tie in with healing. So for example, Combat Prayer provides a heal as well as Minor Berserk, so you can work on both at the same time that way. So it is actually a little bit easier than you think to manage buffs and debuffs on a healer and provide healing at the same time. A lot of the time what I do as a healer is I basically lay down my heal over time, so that would be my Energy Orb, Radiant Regeneration, Illustrious Springs, Illustrious Healing Springs, and then from there just manage buffs and debuffs as needed. So as you have a lot of heal over time, the kind of meta has shifted from just burst heals to heal over time, so you shouldn't really be using Matriarch all too much, except for the emergency burst heal. You should be relying more on your healing over time abilities in order to get your healing done. Outside of that, one of the more important things to maintain as a Sorcerer healer is going to be Liquid Lightning for the synergy, in order to get Major Slayer uptime for your Lakestes stamina users. Then you want to make sure to maintain Blockade for the off-balance proc, as well as to help proc your backbar enchant. So that is pretty much everything I have to say about healers. There are a couple of content creators, links down in the description below to their YouTube channels and Twitch streams, that are going to be able to provide better advice on healing. So I don't personally heal very often. I'm not a healer main, but I have 4 content creators down below that are healer mains that will be able to provide better advice and better sort of healing lessons than I would. So if you guys have any questions about this build or about healing in general, you can always ask them here and I'll try to answer your questions at the best of my ability. But if you want some more detailed information, then I would recommend checking out the 4 content creators that I have down in the description below. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.